Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Center for Technology Licensing Special Panel, Lab to Impact Health, from Idea to Prototyping and Design in Medical Devices. I'm Donna Rounds, Associate Director of Business Development and Licensing at Weill Cornell, and I'm thrilled to moderate this exciting session. So this panel is part of our Cornell Lab to Impact series, which highlights the journey from research and clinical insight to real-world innovations. So today we're really focusing on prototypes, those very messy but imperfect, but absolutely essential tools that help transform ideas into life-saving technologies. Between our colleagues at Cornell Ithaca campus and Weill Cornell, we have many prototyping and early stage technology development programs that I would be remiss not to mention, in particular, our Startup Works in Ithaca that has a startup program as well. My colleague, I must call out Newton DeFeria, who has an amazing program for product engineering and design and biomedical innovation. He also mentors and leads initiatives for cross-campus innovations, connecting engineering students with clinicians. Here at Weill Cornell, we have our BioVenture eLab and a variety of different medical device initiatives, the Center for Life Science Ventures up in Ithaca, as well as the Praxis Center, and of course the Runway program. We also have funding programs, the Ignite program and the Catalyst program. So a lot of opportunities for really advancing your early stage technologies. And with that, we are joined by four remarkable panelists who bring really diverse perspectives from clinical practice and entrepreneurship to investment and commercialization. So together, we're going to explore how prototypes shape innovation, influence funding, and bridge the gap between clinical need and commercial success. So let's begin by hearing a brief introduction from each of our panelists, including a little bit of a story as they tell you about themselves, about their first experience or a notable experience with a prototype in the medical device space. And let's start with Rache, and then we'll move to Mohammed, and then Audrey and Anthony. So Rache.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the invitation, Donna. I'm very happy to be with this distinguished panel. This will be a fun hour, I think. So my background is I am a surgeon, a breast cancer surgeon. I've been here at Weill Cornell practicing for 32 years. And in the course of those decades of practice, I've also worked a bit with some of the surgical device companies, either as a key opinion leader or as a consultant. And from a more of a peripheral standpoint, I've watched some of those interesting devices go from an idea of a, hey, what do you think, to becoming something, to then becoming commercialized, and then I'm actually getting acquired by major companies. So I found this idea and I thought, wow, if they can do it, I could do this. So I've joined this fabulous team at Weill Cornell, the CTL team. And the basic idea is that I saw an incredible unmet need in lumpectomy patients, that some of them really would benefit from a volume filler of some sort. And that's what this device is about. And I'm very excited about it. And I think it's going to help a lot of women.
Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm a fellow in neurosurgery and pediatric neurosurgery here in the Department of Neurosurgery at Weill Cornell. My experience with prototyping comes go back to 2016, when I had two patients with syndromic craniosynostosis, which is kind of a more advanced feature of light skulls. And one of the surgeries that we do for them is the distraction osteogenesis. We used a distractor system that has two external activation ports, and I was unlucky in my practice to see that, because one of my patients died because of infection, and the other one, we had to do corrective surgeries for her several times because of mechanical failure, and that was also a very devastating thing. So it was very clear for me that there is an unmet need here because of these two activation ports causing a lot of problems from a mechanical standpoint and from a clinical standpoint, mainly infection. So when I joined Cornell in 2022, I collaborated with Dr. Newton DeFeria. As Donna said earlier, he's a wonderful person to work with, and we started from there. I proposed the idea to him. He liked it very much. He proposed it to his students, and we started working on this idea. And now we have a prototype because of this collaboration.
Thank you. Audrey.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. A little different background than the previous two. So I'm a mechanical engineer and got an MBA while I was working at Zimmer, doing product design and development. Knees were my thing. So the company was looking to go from a non-constrained and a semi-constrained type of knee articulating surfaces into a kind of a middle version of them. And so the feel of the parts together was very important. And working with a group of developer surgeons from all over the world, we were lucky to have implemented some 3D printing techniques that allowed us to go from one prototype iteration to another in a couple weeks, as opposed to 2 or 3 months, if it was possible at all. Like, for instance, a knee femoral component, a very tough geometrical shape. So 3D printing changed the game. From Zimmer, I was with Zimmer for 30 years, product development 20 years, including a global leadership position. And the last 10 years, a variety of executive roles. I'm currently with Boomerang Ventures, building off of my angel investing experience. And I serve as Chief Innovation Officer for the Boomerang Studio and a partner in the Boomerang Venture Fund.
Thank you. And Anthony.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share a little bit of my experience over the last 3 decades. Started out, like many, selling in the operating room, working with surgeons, hands-on, about the last 25 years, primarily in the startup world, introducing new technologies and innovations from disposable items, enabling technologies, implantables, et cetera, across multiple specialties. Have quite a bit of experience working with prototypes and working through the various iterations to get to final product and eventual commercialization. Currently founded and am CEO of 2 of my own startups. Back in 2020, decided it was time to do it for myself. I've had the pleasure of working with amazing people throughout my career, a number of surgeons, Dr. Simmons naming one of them, that always come up with great ideas and innovations. And so I work very closely with a lot of surgeon entrepreneurs to help them figure out how to take their idea from the napkin across the finish line to commercialization, and in some cases to an exit. So I'm excited to be here and share what I can.
So Anthony and Audrey, how do you differentiate when you're working with prototypes? How do you differentiate between one that's really promising versus one that's not really going to be viable? Is there something about that? So,
Audrey, you want me to take that first, or would you like to jump in?
Can start.
So I always advise, and I think most follow a simple process of outlining your minimum design requirements first, so that you start to iterate your prototypes with that in mind. I think through early bench testing and just seeing the usability of devices, you quickly learn whether or not they're meeting those particular endpoints. And I have experience in myself where you run into a wall where you're not working with either the right configuration or the right material. And again, it's all dependent on the type of device you're trying to develop. Some could be very low tech and some can integrate both high tech and low tech. But you reach those specific milestones in the iterative process that you quickly decide when it's time to pivot. And it teaches you a lot, along the way. And often you end up revising and sometimes shifting in a completely different direction.
So like Anthony, I think the progression of prototypes, reflecting the iterative design process is really important. And it often tells a story of not just the design, but of the market needs and the feedback from potential customers and users that happen along the way. So sometimes starting with a simple version is really the best approach, and then building on it, because basically you're just trying to create a conversation piece that will lead you to good feedback that will help you improve the design and improve the market impact of the product that will come later.
Yeah, I would expand on one quick point on just again to build off. I think we're both trying to share that in the end, you want to prove your concept. That's really the first major milestone. And so, I think that's a critical part of the iterative process.
Absolutely. And then building on that, Mohammed and Rache, you've been working on your prototypes for years now. Are there any moments where you pivoted, where you were, you had an initial thought and then you pivoted, you thought, oh my gosh, this is just not going to work. What's going to change? Tell us about those moments, maybe. Rache, start, and then Mohammed.
Sure. So two of the really critical components of this device are that it has to be soft, has to feel like breast tissue, and it has to be radiolucent. So it can't obscure the ability to screen patients for recurrences by MRI, ultrasound, and mammogram. So some of the things that we were working with, we thought were going to be great. Actually, one thing we thought, oh, we've got it. This is the answer. And then it turned out that it wasn't the answer, because in the end, it wasn't something that we could use in humans. Well, well, that's pretty important. So then we had to stop there, regroup, and then go forward from there. Then once we got beyond that, then I just take some of these various prototypes, and I have easy access to human breasts. And I can just get an X-ray of one of these beside of a human breast and test right then and there in real time the radiolucency compared to breast tissue. So that's been really good. And some things have gotten ruled out because they just aren't clear enough. And then the softness is also really critical. And we've gone different directions with that, looking at different materials, and some of the materials changing the geometry within the same materials to make it softer. And having that material in my hands that I can feel it and say, is this soft enough or is it not soft enough, has been really critical in helping navigate down this pathway.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, for me, yes. Initially, I wanted to do this device to be internalized. So I'm going to use a magnet activation, and I'm going to use a resorbable material, so I don't need a second operation. And that was very fancy at the time. I was very excited about it, to the point that I was very resistant and stubborn to listen to anyone at that time. And then, I kind of, with the continuous, frustration every time I tried to prove it, I had to, to have a moment of truth. And I will borrow Donna's advice here: don't fall in love with your own ideas. So I had to listen to other people, and also that's the good thing about being able to collaborate with people from with different experiences and different backgrounds. So mentors with more experience than me, and collaborators with more mechanical and engineering experience, like Dr. DeFaria, kind of kept me on track when it comes to let's take it one step at a time, and it turns out to be a very successful approach. So yeah.
Excellent. Let's continue to talk about this, because I think it's a useful discussion. Going back over to Audrey and Anthony, thinking about prototypes, is there any time where a prototype changed your view about a startup's business model?
I'll share a story about one of the startups that have come out of the studio. It's in the vaping cessation arena, and the original concept that the founder had was basically a vape itself with the nicotine product as integral to it. And there would be an accompanying app that helped a vapor ramp down on their vaping. Well, in looking at another factor that's really important in medical devices, that regulatory arena that Rache also mentioned, that the path for anything integrating nicotine is quite long through the FDA. Like the FDA is still trying to figure out what to do with nicotine products that come in the form of vapes. So the company was looking at a $20 million plus regulatory path and an extremely long period of time in a very uncertain kind of regulatory environment for that particular product. So the business model pivot came about to basically change the design, take the nicotine out, create more like a locking case, if you will, that fits the vape. So it can be sold as an accessory, which is allowed without regulatory clearance. So it changed the design, the business model, potentially even the selling channel.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I can tell you that a lot comes from iterating prototypes. And for me, I have actually several examples, but I'll share one. In an early stage startup that I helped commercialize and eventually took over operations in ENT, was a new innovative balloon in balloon sinuplasty, if you're familiar. Very well-established space with a reimbursement code, and really controlled by two strategics, two major companies. And so as we started to iterate prototypes, we discovered that we had a really niche idea that expanded into developing instrumentation in conjunction with the balloon. And so the idea was, and it's on the market today, it's called the SinuSleeve. Really an amazing device innovated by Dr. Gus Arrieta. And as we started to commercialize this and realizing from just usability that we needed to make it a little smaller and then expand into our own instrumentation, that really added to the armamentarium of the ENT in their everyday practice. So that's just one example. As we started to iterate, actually get out and do some usability studies, that it was like the aha moment that this would be a great area that we could expand the business.
Very, very interesting. I mean, very important to think about expanding what your prototype or your product can do. So Mohammed, coming back to you, thinking about your pediatric device. So there are some particular challenges for that. What can you talk a little bit about sort of the challenges you think about when you're thinking about a pediatric device in particular?
Yeah, so I think in pediatric, everything should be dealt with a lot of caution and paying attention. For example, in my case, it's a cranial device, so the bone is very thin. Underneath it is dura and brain, and you wanted to protect every single structure like this. You're not expecting any kind of error when it comes to a device like this. So one of the things is how safe it is. So you want to provide an alternative for the current practice, and you have to provide patients and physicians and healthcare providers in general with a safer option, not just an alternative. So it's not only meeting the unmet need, it's also providing a safe solution for this unmet need. So safety is a huge factor here. The second thing, for example, my device is based on a magnet actuation. So there's a magnet component of the device itself. So how much I will need MRI imaging for these kids, if in my practice, in this case. And in my situation, I don't need MRI much, but at least I have to consider if these patients would be in need for MRI or not, and for how long I would keep the device in them for treating this condition. So the safety thing, and the second is the other things that could be problematic because of such intervention or such technology. So these are the two things that I would come up to my mind when it comes to pediatric devices. That the safety is one thing. Second, in my case, would be the magnet activation and how much I need it, or how much I can postpone it, or how long I can postpone it, or if there is other solution that I can use for imaging to just to like, compromise the need for MRI.
It's challenging to certainly work with pediatric devices, and Rache, your device is completely different than Mohammed's mechanical, not magnetic device. Talk about you've talked a little bit about the challenges of working with a soft tissue. Are there any other things that you think about when you are working for the soft tissue application, and any other indications for use of your technology?
Yeah, I mean, there could be certainly other uses for the technology, any soft tissue filler beyond breast. But I mean, as far as I mentioned earlier, the radiolucency and the softness are really critical. And that's something that you can tell pretty well just by feeling it and just x-raying it. But what's also really important is what happens to this device over time. So this is something that's going to go into a person's body long term and will often have radiation in the area. So then what happens to it? Do we get tissue ingrowth? Do we not get tissue ingrowth? Do we consider that to be a good thing or a bad thing? And then what happens with radiation? So our next step is we're planning to take some of these little prototypes and put them in a mouse. And we're going to radiate half the mice and not radiate half the mice, and then sacrifice the mice and just look at what happened in the tissue. And I think that's going to be critically important in making sure that we're on the right road as far as what we are doing for this, and of course also for regulatory down the road.
So we've heard about some pediatric devices and Rache's soft tissue lumpectomy device. Audrey, when you approach different types of devices, these are very different types of prototypes, very different types of indications. How do you think about investing in these different technologies? And are there different approaches that you take to women's health versus orthopedics versus digital?
So with different markets, usually, especially in the venture arena, you start with the market size and understanding who the players in the market are. So you start with doing research on the market, the products that are already in the market, looking for some similarities and differences. So you do look closely at the specialty and base, the rest of your research in that area. You're looking for common threads on problems because the goal would be to maximize the value proposition of the solution. So there may be additional problems or unmet needs that you can bring into what the original prototype or vision was. So expanding the value proposition becomes very important once you've identified who the users are going to be and what their other needs are. You definitely want to get input from the people who are using similar products, if there are similar products, or who are dealing with the problem itself. So the conversations that you have in the venture world are called customer validation. And the normal flow is you first kind of validate the problem, that the problem is a problem that people recognize and that people want to solve, and that they're willing to employ some kind of technology or maybe spend some kind of, investment to solve that problem. And then as your prototype progresses, you can start to validate that your solution is seen to address the problem. And then the extent to which people think it can address the problem. So it's different stages at different times within that bubble of the market or the people who are dealing with the kind of problem that you want to solve.
And Anthony, sort of thinking about different types of prototypes, how do you think about working with contract manufacturers and engineers to ensure that your prototype meets the clinical needs?
How do I feel about working with them?
Or how do you approach? How do you approach? How do you feel is a different question.
I'll answer my own question. In some instances, it's a necessary evil, right? Because it's all depends on who's bootstrapping the opportunity and how much is it going to cost to get us to certain milestones that de-risk an investment for the likes of maybe Audrey to come in and to fund it to the end. But the approach is primarily researching an engineering group or a contract manufacturer, whether they have full integrated or fully vertically integrated, where they can help you with not just the engineering prototyping, but really set you up for the design for manufacturing through the manufacturing process and everything in between, from setting up a quality management system and maintaining their compliance as it pertains to ISO 13845 standards. And again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but and then regulatory, because I think you need to consider your regulatory pathway and build your strategy along the way. You don't want to overcomplicate things if you could avoid that, right? Because there are different pathways, whether it's a 510K, where you're just coming out with a better mousetrap that you have a predicate device to go against, or if you're going like a de novo, where this is a completely innovative new space or a new technology or modality in an existing space. But really learning about what their core competencies are, I think, is critically important, right? You know, I don't want to work with a contract manufacturer that maybe never touched a specific idea that I want to develop or an entrepreneur wants to develop. So I think that's critically important to vet out, you know, there's plenty of options out there, and there's both
Yeah.
domestic and foreign too. So you need to consider those things as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, Rache and Mohammed, you've both worked now with some contract engineers. Mohammed, what have you learned from working with contract research engineers?
That finding the right group is a key. Like a group that you can communicate with, that you both speak the same language. Not necessarily means that you agree on everything, but at least you have similar kind of intellectual similarities when it comes to how you approach the problem and how you can see the solution. So I think that's a key factor here. I've experienced it both when I have nothing in common with a group I've worked with, and also the group I'm lucky to work with right now, which I feel like that we've teamed up for years. So that's a key. So what like you need to make sure that the group you work with is really meeting your kind of standards when it comes to what you're looking for. So that's one. The second thing is, which may like be under the first one as well, but I mean, if they have the experience with what you're looking for. So in my situation, I'm looking for someone who understands mechanics and magnetic systems very well. So that helped a lot with the second group, like I'm working with right now, because they have a lot of experience when it comes to like the magnet actuation and the magnet configuration. Because in my device, we were talking about millimeter, and like it's a very precise thing, and everything is like kind of a Swiss watch, like high precision, very accurate, and we cannot tolerate any kind of mistakes or lack of accuracy when it comes to these procedures. Not only because it's a very young age, we do it in like a couple of months of age in these kids, but also because the consequences of failure here is very devastating, because it goes from changing the device to mechanical failure to like second procedures which you're not expecting in a device that you will eventually like take out from these kids. So you're talking about like 2-3 surgeries if things went wrong. So I think these are the key factors when it comes to like who you work with.
And Rache, how about you? Have you learned anything about working with contract engineers?
I really have, because, you know, I have this concept, and to me, it seems like the easiest thing in the world, but I had no appreciation for the detail of how hard it would be to make this thing. So we actually have 2 different iterations of the same idea, and I've come to appreciate that no matter how much I emotionally want to make one of them, and I think it's just fantastic and elegant, it may come down to the other one is so much easier and cheaper to make that we end up going that direction because of just the practicality of it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's turn now. We have a little bit better understanding of how prototypes are built and the different kinds of prototypes. And they don't just validate ideas, they're also really powerful tools for communicating value to investors or partners or stakeholders. So going back to you, Audrey, what role does a prototype play in your due diligence process, in your investing process, in your early stage thinking process about a commercial opportunity?
It's really important. So sometimes we'll talk to founders who have an idea and they haven't even gotten to the point of having a prototype yet. That can be tough, right? You're looking at the drawings, or maybe just hearing them describe it. Maybe they've got some wireframes to represent a software aspect, but you're not really seeing how it works. So it can be hard to convey the full intention of the prototype when you're dealing with those simpler versions. Once a better developed prototype is available, I think it helps us identify the stage of development. How far along is it? How close is it to being tested, or how close is it to being fully validated from a design perspective? So it indicates the stage of development of the idea for certain. It also is that conversation topic that helps with the customer validation effort. So if they don't have a good prototype, then it's really hard to imagine that they've been able to complete or do a thorough job of customer validation, which is incredibly important to the investment decision. So the encouragement when people do come with, an idea or a less developed prototype is, hey, it'd be great to see you take this another couple steps forward so that it can convey really what your intention is, and that it can lead to some deeper conversations about value proposition.
And do you have any issue with works like Frankenstein prototypes versus some more polished prototypes? When you see some, tape and cardboard thing put together, does it make you go, oh, or does it make you go, okay, I can see something there?
So I'm the only kind of R&D person on the team that I work with today. So can I envision something that's beyond the tape and the whatever cobbled together version? I can, not everybody can. And so especially if you're at that stage of needing some customer input, it's really important to have something that conveys easily and in a way that, easily, quickly, let's say that it doesn't break, that it actually, if it's intended to work, that it actually works. So any departure from that can be kind of distracting as you're talking to investors.
Yeah. Anthony, how about you? Have you used prototypes to secure funding prior to, say, full validation of that?
Yes, it's kind of a loaded situation. It's like blind dating, right? Sometimes you show up and it's great, and sometimes it's not so great. But do you want to continue, right? And I think, to Audrey's point, it's about de-risking. I think that for me as an entrepreneur and having to raise money, the cart before the horse scenario. You don't have necessarily the funding to build a prototype. You have a general idea. Maybe you have some CAD drawings or some rough drawings. It's hard to get someone to kind of see things the way you do and to get them to write a check. So more often than not, the entrepreneur self-funds, at least through that first milestone of somewhat proving the concept. And then once you do that, then I think you can tell your story through the prototype, to Audrey's point. And when you're able to do that, it makes it simple for any investor to see it the way you do, backed up by the market research and all the other, boxes that need to be checked. Furthermore, as an entrepreneur, you want to get maximum value. So you're not giving away too much of your company. right? If it's not valued that highly and you need to raise a certain amount of money, you're going to give up more equity. And you don't want to do that early on. You certainly want to try to avoid it. So the further along in your iterative process, the more value and less and more de-risking you're going to do, and sets you up for greater fundraising. Personally, I have not raised money without a prototype. So I would just say that I've tried, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult as it is to raise money, because you also compete with a lot of great innovations out there. So it's the story backed up by, as Audrey said earlier, a significant addressable market in a specific space, really understanding who the players are, and do you just have a better solution for an inherent problem? And you have to make sure that it's not a solution looking for a problem.
Right, right, right. Right, there's a lot of that out there. I mean, how do you evaluate? So I'll turn this over to pretty much everybody. How do you evaluate a prototype that communicates a clear clinical and commercial vision? Sorry.
Who do you want to
I've mentioned it already, but I would say talking to the users and stakeholders, understanding the workflow, understanding how the solution fits in the workflow, who's touching it, who's using it, who's benefiting from it, who is it maybe not helping. Again, we start with validating that the customers think it's a problem, and then move on to the solution. Because if you try to start with validating the solution, you might end up with what Anthony was describing, a solution without a real problem that people care about.
Yeah,
There's some great ideas, but it's not marketable, it's not commercializable,
Yeah.
that's always a challenge. But understanding what the investor is looking for, as an entrepreneur, being proactive in obtaining as many data points that help validate what you're pitching, so to speak, doing a round of customer surveys or usability studies is critically important. Even I'll call it general market data, sort of like what we did with Dr. Simmons, project, going out and just identifying what do patients look for? What do the patients want? Would they be interested in something like this? And would they ask their physician for it? Just as much as we would go to the physician and say, how would you use it? Why would you use it? Do you see the value in it? For myself, I've done a lot of hands-on opportunities where I brought the prototype to them, had a synthetic model. For example, in my spine startup, we have a working prototype, and we use like a sawbones model, and we let them perform the procedure with the device. And the feedback that we get, going back to the earlier conversation, makes us think about how to improve upon the original idea. And it just starts to morph into something amazing. Whereas you thought you had something amazing, but now it's more real wow, expands the opportunity, and covers a lot of what we already spoke about. So being proactive, I think, is really important from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
super important. And Rache,
Yeah.
you've got prototypes and you've used prototypes. How do you think about using them to communicate to clinicians or non-clinicians about the value of what you have?
Sure. Well, I think as far as clinicians, being a clinician, it needs to be simple. It needs to be simple, and it needs to not change their workflow. It needs to make their life easier and better for their patients. So if you can show them, look, this is going to take you 5 minutes to do in the operating room, and it's going to be so much better. And if I have a prototype and I can just show them, this is what it's like, and they'll get it right away, then that's incredibly helpful. And then I've also been incredibly fortunate to have some grateful patients who have supported this project, and to be able to show them as a non-medical person, this is what it is, and they get it right away. So it's the simpler, the better, but to have something that's three-dimensional and concrete, and they can look at it, they can feel it, they can see it, it really helps them understand what this is all about.
Super important. Mohammed, you don't quite have the same devices that Rache can hold in her hand, but you do have prototypes and you have done cadaver studies. How are you thinking about utilizing those cadaver studies and the work that you did there with the prototypes to think about communicating to investors or funders or your clinical colleagues?
Yeah, I deal with it from more of an academic perspective, and that's what I'm trained best to do. So I think having more data for either patients or surgeons or investors and market moving forward is more convincing and more appealing. So if you try to show people that this prototype or this idea that you came with is actually working. So like what I did in the cadaver study, like I had a prototype, I showed it to people, like even in my department. And then I said like, yeah, I'm gonna test it. And the answer was, yes, we are excited to see the results. And that was the immediate reaction. Not show us the device, not show us the prototype, nothing. So the answer was, yes, we're looking forward to seeing the results. I gave the grand round a few days ago in my department, and they were very excited when I presented the results that the device is actually working. And this is how it looks like, showing them the imaging. We did the CT imaging of the device and how it looks like. So people are more excited to see the outcome more than the process itself, how we got there and why you can do it. That's why I agree with everyone that going out there without a prototype, with just an idea, is less exciting for a lot of people to just to give you a chance and to be supportive in comparison to like those who have a prototype, they tested, they show results, and you're simply taking every single step. There would be a requirement for you when it comes to like regulatory pathway or like whatever the next step is. So in my opinion, the results of testing moving forward, whether it comes to cadavers or animal models or whatever testing you plan to do, is very exciting and very convincing for people, for patients, clinicians, and investors.
Let's talk a little bit about mistakes. So what are the mistakes that people make during these early stage times when you're developing a medical device? Anthony, have you ever come across or made any mistakes in early stage development, or things that you think, oh,
You actually want me to admit that?
you
Of
could say
course.
that about, say, somebody else that you know did.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that it's not my saying, but it's, if you're going to lose, don't lose the lesson, right? I think, mistakes are just part of the process. And sometimes to the earlier point, and I think Dr. Fouda said the same thing, like if you don't have a good partner that you can communicate with, it's, kicking the can down the road and staying with your partner too long. Sometimes you have to rip the Band-Aid off, make a decision, and get out early enough to recover, because time and money and all the things that are involved, it only hurts progress. Sometimes sticking. I'll share an exact example. So, and Rache, you mentioned earlier about materials and different things. So I had to make an executive decision with my own project in spine, and we were going down a pathway where we felt, I hate to use the term good enough, that we felt it was good enough for the Gen 1, even though we knew there was a better development pathway for the Gen 2. But I was thinking about the extra 6 to 9 months it would take to go down that path and the extra $500,000 it would cost to do it, where I thought I could commercialize the Gen 1, start to self-fund that second generation project. But we hit an inflection point, and I realized that I was making a big mistake. And it cost me a little time and money, but at that inflection point, we pivoted completely. And now we're the benefactor of that decision. So that's just a good example that you just have to recognize the mistake, admit to yourself. I think Dr. Fouda said it earlier, right? Don't fall in love with your own idea or a specific pathway. Listen to those that are around you. Leverage the people that are in the process and be intuitive enough to know when you're not doing the right thing.
Yeah, balancing speed and precision and.
Sometimes go slow to go
and
fast.
funding.
Yeah, exactly.
Go slow to go fast,
Yeah,
exactly.
100%.
How about Audrey, have you ever come across or made any mistakes or seen any mistakes in your executive days or in your subsequent days?
Probably more than I can even remember, but I'll share one from the last few years. We were working with a PI who had published on a technology that involved plastic devices that would come into contact with the body, so at least skin contact with sensors embedded in them. And he had a way to make them, which was great and very exciting. And similar to what Rache spoke of earlier, some of the material selection. Once we got to the stage a few months into the project where we were looking in detail at the materials that he used, we realized that one of those materials was going to be problematic from a regulatory perspective. It was not cleared for contact with the body. And the assumption was that there would be some encapsulation of that material so that that material wasn't going to be in direct contact with the body. But for me in particular, it represented a level of regulatory risk that just made the project difficult to pursue. Like Anthony was mentioning, the timeline was going to get longer. It was going to require a lot more testing to show that that material, if it stayed in the device, was safe and effective. So we ended up pivoting away from that project, and the PI went on to look at other applications besides the original one that he was looking at.
Actually, Donna, I have a comment. You'll remember this the other day. We were having a group meeting with the IP attorney, and I was saying, well, we're trying this, and then we tried that, and then we tried that. And he goes, that's a really good thing, because if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it, and you wouldn't have any IP.
That's right.
It's true.
It's good that you bring up IP because again, you need to really think strategically about how you're going to protect your intellectual property and then build a picket fence around it, and expanding beyond just the utility or design, but with methods. And through the iterative process of prototyping, you quickly discover that maybe either your IP isn't strong enough or broad enough, right? Because sometimes you start super narrow and then you start to build out your portfolio to get as broad as possible. So the prototyping is a critical part of your IP process and strategy as well. I just wanted to point that out, being you brought it up.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, actually, that's a good point, if you don't mind, Donna, because what
Please.
Anthony said right now is perfectly what happened to me. So I started with one indication, like I'm going to do this as a one condition, which is craniosynostosis, and I can't see anything further than that. And then with the prototyping process, and this is why prototyping is important, we kind of invented this little tiny piece that expanded the application of the device from one condition to like 15.
Wow.
So our last IP was completely different from the first one that we submitted. That was very narrowed and it was very limited to one condition. And with the more, and that's why prototyping is extremely important when it comes to how you approach your idea and also how you present it to colleagues or investors moving forward. So your point is absolutely right.
Super important.
Yeah.
Super important. I see we only have about 10 minutes left. So we have a couple of questions. One about Rache, your patients were willing to test your prototype under development. I think maybe they misunderstood what you said about your breast.
Right. So this is not used in humans yet. So the patients have been very generous and very grateful in supporting us to this point in creating this project. But we're not at the point yet of putting it into a human being. I hope we will be there soon, but we're not quite there yet.
And the breast that you have.
I misunderstood the question. Oh, no. So the breast that I'm X-raying this with, we're not we're not putting these into human beings yet. So when I do mastectomies, I have a breast that I've removed. So I have an ex vivo breast that I can then x-ray in, right there in the operating room. And I put these prototypes next to the ex vivo breast. And that's how I'm able to get the translucency or not compared to breast tissue. But we're not putting this in people yet.
Another question about estimating cost and duration of the regulatory process, something that CTL can certainly start to help with, but maybe address as part of what you were saying, Anthony, about, how do you think about costing out some of these things early on? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, you really should have an idea of what your pathway is going to be. If it's a 510K, then you're really measuring against a predicate device, right? That you don't want inferiority. You want to be equally safe and effective. And typically with that pathway, it's a less expensive from proving your concept clinically, may or may not. And you need to do a pre-sub. And in your pre-sub communication with the FDA, they'll typically either agree with your strategy or give you some ideas of how they would measure the device to eventually clear. That could require a study or it could not. And you may strategically decide to do a clinical study with a small cohort of patients just to strengthen your application. Moreover, to strengthen your initial commercial launch. I think what Dr. Fouda said earlier, data is critical. So the more you have, the better it is for those at least early adopters when you go commercial to try your device and to start to establish, a market.
Yeah.
So the budgets vary. I can't give you a number. It's really interdependent. It's situationally specific.
Yeah. Another question. Student interested in pursuing a career in medical device venture capital or business development. Audrey, do you have any thoughts or advice to clinicians, researchers, or engineers who want to either go in that direction or change careers?
Sure. Yeah, happy to answer that one. Everybody remember that long winter break that the students had back in 2020, 2021? So we hired an engineering intern during that time, and she ended up, she did some market research kind of work in addition to technical research kind of work initially. She stayed with us for the remainder of her senior year, undergraduate, and she joined us full time. She's still with us. So kind of an amazing story. It was sort of the right person at the right time who's developed really well into the role that she plays now as a project engineer. And so she assists all of our, we call them executives in residence, on each and every project they're working on with founders that come into the studio. So that's one example. I think another path is certainly to work in the industry itself, not in the venture arena, particularly if you're a technical person. I think that hands-on experience is just unparalleled in terms of understanding not just the steps that you have to go through or how you move from A to B, but also how technologies are developed, and it makes you a better judge of the technologies that you will end up seeing as a venture capital person. So yeah, venture sounds really, really hot. It's hard to come into venture without some outside experience.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I'd like to invite each of the panelists to share maybe a key takeaway or piece of advice for the clinicians, engineers, innovators, and students who are thinking about turning their idea into a tangible prototype.
I'll be happy to start.
Sure.
I would say contact this team. I mean, this team is here to help you, and they've been amazing at getting me to the place where I am now with this idea. So thanks to them, and I would highly recommend you reaching out to them early in your project.
Thank you for the shout out there.
Yeah, I'll go next, and I will echo Dr. Simmons about like how great the CTL is and how great the culture at Cornell is. The collaboration culture is amazing, and it's kind of fostering like how we can do better, even like up in Ithaca as well. The second thing is mistakes are inevitable. So just to be prepared that you will do mistakes for anyone who's starting this from the beginning. Just learn how to bounce back fast. That's my only advice.
Mohammed, I like that. It's iterative. Like if you think you're going to design and build your perfect prototype round one, the odds are far against you. So plan to be iterative. And sometimes that means starting simple, even if it's a complex thing. Maybe you want to simplify the design, or you're going to use some materials that won't be your final materials, or manufacturing methods like 3D printing, to get you to the first thing that you can use to have those really valuable discussions with folks.
Absolutely. Go from simple to complicated. I like that. That's really a good approach. And you'll always need a little more money than you think, and you need a little more time than you think. But I'll tell you that having covered a lot of the early stages of getting started is aligning yourself with the right people. Find people who have either done it before or know someone who has done it before, and start to collaborate and communicate to try to get some perspective. I always advise to work under a non-disclosure or a confidentiality agreement. Protect yourself. I think that's always important. Whether you reach out to folks on this team or in your own network, having the right people with the right intention to help you is critically important. You can't do it alone. Don't think you have to either.
So we have a couple more questions, and to that end, one question was, how do you think about, or how do you recommend finding subject matter experts? Does anyone have any thoughts about finding those subject matter experts for advancing your prototypes?
I would start do your search well, and also reach out to people who can help you. And again, back to CTL, that's a great resource that you can use, and everyone is always happy to help. So do your own search and reach out to the right people.
Networking is key, right? And
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
if you're in the device space, speaking to people that are in the industry is a good place to start.
Another important question, just for Audrey and Anthony, what do you have a thought about the percent of ideas that don't work, and thoughts about when you walk away from an idea? Sorry to get back into it here after our final thoughts, but a couple more questions and a couple more minutes here.
I'll take it quick, just from my perspective, because I do a lot of consulting work and I work with entrepreneurs. Just the inability to answer some really critically easy questions in the onset of a conversation. I automatically know that this may not be the right person to develop the idea, whether the idea is valid or not, right? Because I think the people and the leadership around the idea are critically important. And some ideas are just not, I hate to say the word sexy enough. It may be a widget that, could sell for $50 or $100. Yes, it's a high volume, but highly commoditized projects don't really interest me too much.
Agree with all of that. And I would also add that, if it's a concept or a prototype that is trying to kind of boil the ocean, try to do too much. That's a tough road for a whole bunch of reasons. And so if there's some coaching, hey, what's the most important problem, or the 2 or 3 most important problems that you really want to solve, and can we focus on those? And if there's resistance to that, then it's something probably to walk away from.
Great. And listen, if anyone wants to get in touch with our panelists, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to make connections. And listen, thank you again. I know we're at time, to our panelists for sharing your expertise, your experiences, and to our audience for your thoughtful questions and engagements. We hope that today's session inspired you to take the next step on your innovation journey. So stay tuned for future events in the Lab to Impact series. And as always, CTL is here to support your path from idea to impact. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.